Good afternoon, everyone. Everyone here and online. There's about 40 people online, so hello to you out there on the internet. We're pleased to have you here today. My name is Audra Kruger, and I'm the Executive Director for Cooperatives First. That's a nonprofit, and we work in Western Canada, and we work to educate about the cooperative model, and we also work alongside groups that are looking to develop their own co-ops. And in the 6 years that we've been created, we've worked with about 150 groups on various kinds of co-ops, and about 25 of them we could define as agricultural co-ops. But in addition to that, agriculture is very close to my heart. I grew up on a large mixed farm in Saskatchewan, about 7,000 acres. My dad still farms, my brother farms, so I'm very connected. But it's been about 14 years since I've turned a wheel on the combine. I was about 5 months pregnant, and I was bouncing around through the fields, and I thought, what am I doing here? I think they'll be okay without me. And in fact, they are. You'll be happy to know that. They're still farming away. And talking about these kinds of things, this session gave me an opportunity to talk to my dad about what his thoughts were on this kind of thing. And, we had a good conversation there, and agriculture. What I've noticed, I've been taking notes throughout this, and there's a lot of really important issues here, but I think the people in the room and the people online that are interested in this know that agriculture for many of us is something that's very close to us, and it defines us, and it continues to define me and chart my course and keep me grounded. So I'm really happy to be involved in this. Thank you to the organizers, the Canadian Centre for the Study of Cooperatives. I think it's been a really important space. They've set the table for us to have a great discussion, so thank you for that. So today we're going to have some speakers that I'm very excited to introduce. I'm going to introduce them by name and title only because we want to hear from them. First, we have Don Smith, and he's the VP of Petroleum and Innovation for United Farmers of Alberta. Next to him, you will see Darcy Smith she represents the Young Agrarians through the Land Matching Program here in BC. And online, you do not see him yet. We have Warren Serafinshin. He's the CEO of BC Tree Fruits. And then finally, we have Jeremy Welter, and he's Board Director, Agricultural Producers Association of Saskatchewan. So thank you all for speaking. They're going to spend about 10 minutes each talking about, we talked about the big issues, but Don volunteered to sort of set the stage and talk about data and data used on farms more broadly. So about 10 minutes each, and then that should give us about half an hour for questions if that goes well. Thank you.
Thanks, Audra. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining this afternoon. I want to give maybe a real quick background on who UFA is. UFA is the United Farmers of Alberta. We're a 113-year-old ag cooperative. We're a centralized cooperative. That's sort of the structure. I know Billy talked earlier about the structure that they have in the US. Our structure is sort of that one person, one vote type of structure. We are a parliamentary type of structure in our cooperative. We actually ran the government of Alberta for 14 years back in the 1920s. We won't talk too much about that, but we have retained that governance structure. And you heard a lot of discussion today about the importance of governance, and it really is an important topic when you're talking about representing the rights of the individual farm producers. So we have that parliamentary type system. So all of our elected officials, come from our membership, and then they have a responsibility for electing our board of directors. We're an ag supply cooperative. So we supply everything out to our farmers and ranchers, and we have 110,000 members, which really represents pretty much all of the farms and ranches in Alberta, some in Saskatchewan, and some in British Columbia as well. And so I think it is important to get the voice of the producer out there. And there's you've heard a lot of really good discussion today about data and how data is evolving and what it can mean and what it's going to drive. But from the producer perspective, the number one objective that any producer has is yield. That's what they're there to do. They are there to plant their crops and grow as much. They get compensated on the number of bushels that they produce. They get compensated on the weight of the animals that they produce. And so, you know, anything that is going to be put in front of them has to really result in an increase in yield. And really all of these other objectives really need to lead back to that. They have to lead back to an actual yield increase or profitability increase on the farm. And, you know, I would say, you know, another big thing, and this was shown in one of the previous presentations, for Western Canadian producers, one of the biggest problems that they're trying to face right now, and I can't really speak as much for the for fruit and vegetable growers, but certainly for broadacre as well as livestock, it's about water management and moisture, and there's a real lack of moisture in the prairies. That's probably the biggest thing that people are facing right now. And you know, in the end, that really comes back to your soil and soil health management. You know, how is your soil able to hold water better through drought conditions? Is it better able to withstand runoff during extreme weather conditions? So, you know, these are the things that are really important back to a producer, because again, it will result in better yield for them. And, you know, so it's interesting. I was just in last night, flew back into Calgary from San Francisco, where I was at the World Agritech Summit, and it was a fantastic summit. I would recommend it to anybody. It really does highlight all of the different technologies, you know, that are being thought of and brought to bear. You know, it went from animal tech to farm tech through to food tech. And there was great representation at this, and the representation, you know, went from VCs through academia, you know, through startups, and cooperatives were there, but there was a real lack of producer representation. And so we really, that's one of the things that I noted is actually one of the better sessions that occurred was when somebody from one of the farms in Illinois came up on stage and actually talked to some of these startups to say, quite frankly, it sounds neat what you're doing, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put that onto my farm. And I think that that's a real issue that we need to get around and get our heads wrapped around, because if we're talking about these things from a perspective of at 100,000 foot level, you really have to get something that is going to be practical for the farmer to use. And they are not going to use new technology if they have to bear the risk on it. And that could be bearing the risk from a financial perspective or from a time perspective. Time is very valuable to them. They're very busy. You know, there's a lot of these data things that require a ton of time, and they don't have it. You know, if you are a cow-calf producer, you are busy 24/7 throughout the entire year, and you don't have time to be putting all of this stuff together. So we've got to make it easy. We've got to de-risk this. It is important. I think that data is, and I think that our producers really that do understand that the acceleration, the needed acceleration, and the technical revolution that needs to happen in agriculture is important. If we're going to feed a world of 10 billion people by 2050 and go to net zero by 2050, that's not going to happen just naturally. That we have to do this through a lot of innovative technology, and you need to have the underlying data in order to be able to drive that technology. So what we're talking about and what we've been talking about all day here, I think is very, very important. But we have to do it in a way that I think, you know, it's very, very early in the stages that we're in. And I think that we have the ability to influence both the regulatory and the legal structures in which data is managed. And I think that's very important. I think there's a role to play from all of the different speakers that you heard today, whether it be government, whether it be academia, whether it be private sector or cooperatives. In fact, not even an or, it's an and, have a single voice back. And I think that we need to be able to create these structures that are going to protect the farmer, because it should be the farmer's data. Then it should be them that owns it. I have a belief that the cooperative system is a good system to be able to do that in, because it is the farmers that own the cooperative. And so therefore they would still continue to own the data. So I do think that the cooperative structure is one that is, that is conducive to keeping the rights of the farmer protected, and yet be able to achieve all the things that you need to do with data. Data needs to be standardized. Data needs to be normalized. We talked about the transportability of data. And those are all very, very important. We need to talk about the security of data. And so all of those things need to be accomplished at some sort of aggregation type level, because the individual farm can't do that. The individual farmer can't do that. The individual farmer isn't going, needs to be somewhat protected, I believe, in terms of the rights of their data. We know that there's a lot of data right now that is being collected by third parties that is, I hesitate to say that it's been weaponized against them, but sort of, that it is being sold, it is being utilized by other entities that isn't to the benefit of the farmer. And I think that that's really important to understand. I think we need to educate the farmer and the rancher around what their rights are and what their rights should be. And what are those data sets that they are providing? They're providing a lot of data right now that I don't think that they even understand that they're providing. And so there's certainly an education, there's an advocacy that we all need to play. And in the end, it has to be the farmer and the rancher that implements these things. They're the ones, data unto itself isn't going to generate anything. It has to be applied back onto the field. It has to be applied, back into the ranch to improve the regenerative farming, sustainable farming, and our ability to, again, feed the rest of the world. So, so I think that, the things that I really wanted to stress today was that I do think it's really important for us to codify that legal language around where the data is owned and who owns the data from its inception. And that's going to follow through, I think, and it should follow through to even different levels of aggregation. Data will need to get aggregated. You've heard that time and again that an individual farm data, which is different than a farmer data, that those things unto themselves may not, it's not going to be enough to drive change. You do need to aggregate it in order to drive change. But you also need to not lose the value back to the farm once you've aggregated it. So I think that those are all, again, very important concepts that I believe that we need to collectively go back to governing agencies and understand the law around that and try and move forward that law. I think back to mineral rights. Mineral rights were a thing that was really very confusing back 100 years ago. And had to get codified. And I see data as very, very similar to that. So yeah, so I guess in the end, I believe that I do believe the cooperative structure is a good structure to do that in, but I want to make sure that the discussion around data is rooted in how is it going to help and be implemented practically on the farm. So. I think now I pass it actually over to Warren online.
Great, thank you so much. And I certainly wish I could be there live, but unfortunately I had some other commitments. But it's great to have the technology to be able to talk to you today remotely. So as Audra pointed out, I'm the president and CEO of BC Tree Fruits Cooperative. We have over 300 growers that we represent. And basically it's anything that grows on a tree, if you will. We basically take that product in, we pack it, and then sell it to customers all over the world. And the cooperative is actually quite interesting. We've been around since 1936. We have that core cooperative business. We also have a retail supply business, and we also have an alcoholic cider business, all of which form the enterprise that we operate. And when we look at the challenges of the producers in our region and in our category, we look at the input costs that our growers are facing today, and they are going up substantially every single day. I was talking to some growers last week whose fertilizer costs and chemical costs and so on, in some cases, are going up 20, 30, and 40%. You then take, there was a comment about water. Water is a challenge, and the cost of water is going up. And then when we look at the cost at the cooperative, whether it's corrugate costs, labor costs, transportation costs, all of these areas are increasing. So when you look at those cost increases, and then beside that, when you look at the Canadian retail marketplace, where 5 or 6 grocers make up 80% of the volume that's sold in Canada, there's considerable pressure on pricing. So in the middle, we've got our producers who, in our particular case, have really been dealing with some financial challenges over the past number of years. And what it's doing, I mean, and to give you some context of that, we have some categories and some segments and some growers that are not even earning the cost of production right now. So it's not a sustainable place, and we're working very closely as an industry and with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries with the BC government to try to find some long-term sustainable solutions. But one of the things that I see that we absolutely need to do more of is leverage technology from the farm all the way back through to consumers. And I absolutely agree with the comment about there's lots of technology out there, and there's lots of quote unquote cool things you can do. But fundamentally, the technology that we use and that we implement needs to increase the returns for our growers. And like anyone, trying to convince a large group of growers like we have, some are fast adopters, some watch, some aren't so sure. But when I look at the technology that's out there that allows us to use drones to get a sense of crop volumes, crop yields, crop quality, we're looking at technology to integrate into our receiving process so we can better manage the fruit and storage. We're in the process of implementing I'll describe it as a grower management system, but it's really a customer relationship management tool like many organizations are going to, so that we better understand our growers and what their end customers and what their needs are. So for us, we are spending a lot of time and money on really modernizing the technology that we use. And I think, as I've looked at, when I look at the net result of that, I believe that we can open new markets, we can increase the quality of products that our growers are producing, and ultimately that's going to drive higher levels of return. But as I said, it does require investment and does require growers and in our case the cooperative to do some things differently, to take risks. And one of the things that I found to be very successful is if you start off and you try to roll technology out to everyone all at once, sometimes it works, but oftentimes you get mixed responses versus if you can target producers that are on the leading edge, that are open to trying different things, and who are prepared to represent the idea and the concept. I'm thinking of one example where we made a very simple change. One of our growers that was producing product for the export market, we asked him to clip the stems on ambrosia apples. So ambrosias have a long stem. When you pick it, that stem, when it goes in a bin, will create small punctures. And when it gets to overseas markets, you start to see rot and damage. So this grower, it cost him an extra $20 per bin in labor to do that. And he made an extra $120 to $140 in revenue. So it paid off. And now we're seeing more and more growers adopt that. And I think technology is going to be very much the same way. And if growers see other growers using technology and making more money, I think they will, I think we'll get that adoption. So I'm a huge supporter of data. It's something that's critical to our business and to our growers. And I am not sure who I'm turning it over to next, but it's one of two. So, all right, Darcy, over to you.
So I'm with Young Agrarians, and we are the largest new and young farmer network in Western Canada. We're a farmer-to-farmer educational resource network, and we offer online education, community business mentorship, on-farm apprenticeship training, and land matching. And while I'm certainly not an expert in big ag data, I'm here to bring the voice of small-scale, diversified farmers into the room. The Young Agrarians Network is primarily made up of those small-scale farmers. We work with people who are trying to get into the sector, who are trying to make it through startup and become viable. And in 2021, we worked with 2,000 farmers, representing about 1,250 farms. In 2015, there was a survey done of new farmers across Canada, and that survey showed that of the respondents, most of them were coming from a non-family farm background, getting into agriculture in the small scale space because that's where the entry point is when you don't have access to land, knowledge, or capital the way that someone coming from a family farm background might. So that brings a whole host of challenges forward. We are also talking about, most of the time, a younger generation who tends to be more tech savvy, the smartphone in the field type of farmer. But I think, in preparing for this session, I've talked to a lot of farmers about technology and data, and the response, when I bring it up is a bit of not really sure what this, how this applies to me as a producer in the small scale space. And I think that is quite common, where small scale farmers feel like they are not included in the conversation, in the development of tools, and in what is being offered, not represented there. Their problems are not being solved. And I think that's, we've talked a lot about trust today and what the value is for farmers. And when we talk about a diversified market garden, for example, where that farmer might be growing 45 different vegetable crops, the time that has been mentioned that a farmer has to put into this with data collection, data gathering, is a lot more intensive. And then also the systems seem to really work for commodity crops, single crops, and it becomes a lot more complex when you're looking at a diversified system. And I don't know that that small-scale producers feel that the solutions are addressing their complexity. Yet they have the same challenges as all the other producers. I think, in other ways that data pops up in agriculture, we're seeing the agriculture census this year eliminating producers that earn less than $20,000 a year. And that's most of the farms in BC by number, 75% of farms in BC. So where are we? We're not tracking the data the same way on these farms, and these also new entrants who are coming into the sector and earning less. So how are we even able to, at the basic level, capture data about these farms, serve them, make sure their important role in our food system is addressed here? The thing that farmers put forward most of all when I asked them about this was the need for appropriate technology, scale appropriate. And that's going to look different for different farmers. And then there's no one size fits all solution. There is no simple solution, despite the fact that farmers still need simplicity in those solutions. So a bit of a catch-22 there. And I often think about the Silicon Valley slogan, "Move fast and break things," which seems like a terrible thing to do in agriculture. So I think small scale producers are wondering, where is this going? What is the tech side bringing into agriculture that is going to be counter to the objectives of the farmers that we work with? Cost of entry is another big one. Small scale farmers, new farmers don't have a ton of cash to throw around on implementing, trialing new systems. They're just trying to make it through the season. And that's not to say that having good data wouldn't really support them. I think it's just about how is it implemented in a way that will benefit small scale producers. Farmer autonomy is also something that came up in the first session today. And I think that we've also been having a lot of conversations over the last few days about relationships and land, and hearing Uncle Mike, the elder, speaking about what's been lost. And I haven't heard this side of things in the conversations, and I just maybe wanted to throw this little wrench into the mix around what does that look like when we're talking about ag data? How are we taking decision making, taking the farmer's knowledge of the land out of the equation here and relying on data that is aggregated and may have some really great value, but what are we losing in that as we move towards more automation, more mechanization? What are we losing? I think that coming back to that idea of are we decolonizing our food system? Is that what farmers are interested in? Is that what the food system is interested in? Is how does data fit into all of that? And I think that's where there's perhaps a divergence between, maximizing yields, producing more, making really good business decisions, but also what is the other side of things? Like, how does a healthy ecosystem fit into that? Our Prairies program manager is really involved in holistic management as well, and looking at ecological outcomes verification, which was actually developed by a co-op in Australia in part, which I think is really interesting. But when we look at ecological outcomes and ecosystem services, which were mentioned earlier, this is where farmers are using data points gathered on their farm, observable impacts of the regenerative practices that they're implementing to show how they're regenerating the landscape. And I think that's a different way of looking at and using data that I think we often miss the huge ecological value of those ecosystems, very complex, diverse ecosystems. That's also a way of, for the small scale regenerative farmer, adding value for them, you know, those ecological outcomes verifications, if they're able to be compensated for the ecosystem services that they're providing and they can measure that through data points on their farm, that's wonderful. They can also then tell that story back to the consumer, which is really helpful in that trust between the consumer and the farmer, and that big food systems goal of being climate resilient and having, you know, great regional food systems. So I think that's really the conversation for small scale farmers is a bit about why data and how is this helping me, and where are we going from here, seeing all of these things happening up here and being left down here a little bit. So I think, yeah, it comes back to where do we go? Do we go more mechanized, or do we look at how these conversations around data can actually bring us back to the relationship with the land? I think perhaps I'm really curious to hear what some of the folks in the room and online think about that. But for now, I'm going to wrap up and hand it over to Jeremy.
Yes. So my name is Jeremy Welter, and I'm here with the Agriculture Producers Association of Saskatchewan. We are Saskatchewan's grassroots farm lobby group. Similar to what Don had mentioned, we are a fully democratic organization. All of our representatives are elected from their individual member municipalities, and then from that we elect our board of directors and the executive from there. You know, typically I kind of like going last because it allows me to hear what everyone else has said, and you know, I can kind of fill in the gaps if any have been left. The first three presenters have definitely created a very steep mountain for me to try and climb. They really did an excellent job on laying out the a lot of the questions that I have. I was lucky enough to have a really in-depth conversation with an Agritech creator, a gentleman who created a piece of technology that is in, I would say, fairly wide use in Western Canada. And it has been acquired a couple of times, and it currently sits under the TELUS Ag banner. And we were going over a lot of the questions regarding trust in technology. And, you know, myself, I feel probably like a lot of producers don't really hold a lot of excellent trust in large companies. It kind of, that trust is sort of a case of, I'll trust you as far as I can see you, and I'm pretty sure when I can't see you, you're trying to pull something underhanded. And we kind of had a conversation around that, and he made a point that I felt was quite poignant and very important. He said, as a speaker here, I kind of have an obligation to speak from a place of facts and not suspicion. I shouldn't be up here, voicing any suspicions or, feelings that I have regarding what's happening to our data. If I'm here as a supposed expert, I should be educated on the topic, and it's my job and my duty to take those suspicions and set them aside, which, you know, admittedly is tough when it comes to something as personal as what's happening to something that I've essentially created, my data on my farm. You know, I asked that question this morning to our panel this morning: is the data that I create using a piece of technology mine, or am I just basically taxing around somebody else's product? And if I am, if that answer is actually yes, then, you know, the company that I paid to purchase that product has gotten quite a deal, because then I'm paying for their product to give them all of the data. And that's, you know, I mean, in a capitalist society, that's quite a win, right? You know, the idea of ownership of data versus rights to the conglomerate data, you know, it sort of fits into, if everyone here has a piece of a puzzle, if we each own the piece of that puzzle, who collectively owns the entire picture once it's all put together? Do we each own a part of it, or does that picture belong to the person that assembled all the pieces? And I think the idea was brought up this morning that there should be some portion of ownership on the side of producers. Now, the gentleman from FCC at Ag Experts said, you know, maybe it's not an equal share. And I know we talk about this a lot in farm succession. Equal isn't fair and fair isn't equal. So I suppose ultimately the question that needs to be asked is, what is a fair value for the data that producers are providing to some of the larger data conglomeration companies? I suppose as far as challenges go, aside from the privacy and the trust issue, I do know that it is incredibly expensive to develop any piece of technology, whether it is a piece of hardware or a piece of software or software integrated into hardware. The costs associated with that are astronomical, and the number of companies that create something that actually succeed in the long term, it's very small. And so I think we as producers need to keep that in the forefront of our mind when we begin asking for, you know, maybe not concessions per se, but you know, additional opportunities. When we begin asking for additionality, access to some of the benefits of the produced data from our farms and other farms. You know, one of the biggest concerns I feel, and one of the biggest concerns I've seen evidence of, I should say, is what the data is being used for, and is it going to be, or can it be used to manipulate markets unfairly? You know, in a capital free market society, part of that idea is that the data and the information should be available to all, so that everyone is able to make an informed decision from the same place with the same amount of information. Now, if some of the data is not available to everyone, you end up in a situation where there is an asymmetrical information access. And so some people have more information than others, and they're able to make either more informed decisions, or they're able to use that information to adversely affect the market in a way that it was not intended to be, you know, to be dealt with. So, I mean, it's definitely something that that is a concern. There certainly is evidence of it happening and having happened in other areas. And I think that with the amount of data that's being produced, I think we need to, you know, we need to keep that in mind, that there is definitely a possibility to that. Dawn, I would like to take you to task on one very specific thing that you mentioned, and I hear it quite often, and it's very, very common. And I don't really know that it is necessarily, I certainly wouldn't say it's incorrect, but I don't think it captures the entire picture. And Warren mentioned it a little bit too. You know, Dawn, you mentioned that farmers are primarily interested in their total production. And it's true, but it's also not true. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, whether you are a large farmer or small farmer, whether you are just starting out or whether you are coming from, you know, multiple generations of farming, at the end of the day, I think it's important that we all recognize we're trying to run a business. We're trying to run a successful business. We see farming as a way to provide for our families, provide for our communities, and that community could be local. It could be a community on the other side of the world. But we're running a business, and ultimately, at the end of the day, total production will only get me so far if my input costs have gone up to the point where my total production is not covering the cost of my inputs. So when we talk about farming as a business, I think what we need to be focused on is our margin retention. How much of my margin at the end of the day stays in my pocket and is allowing me to make decisions that better affect, and not better affect, but you know, that's allowing me to reinvest in my business. You know, ultimately, when farmers are profitable, communities are profitable, neighbors are profitable, and the country's profitable. And right now, and I think we haven't seen this for a while, You know, the drought and the inclement weather events we've seen, you know, strife in other parts of the world. We're all perfectly well aware of what's happening in Ukraine and how it is distorting not just the market price of commodities, but you know, what commodities, not just the products we produce, but the products we need to create the products that we produce. So, you know, when it comes to the discussion around farms and you know, farms as a business, I guess the data we produce, you know, it's important to keep in mind that our ultimate focus isn't on total production. It's on the amount of that margin that we're able to retain and better invest and improve our business. I'm going to stop there, and I guess we'll open it up to some questions.
Thank you so much. So before we go to questions, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their wisdom with us. This is a great session to close out the conference, because I've heard a lot of things that I heard in earlier sessions. The idea that this holds a lot of opportunity for producers, but we must recognize that there's a diversity of producers, and not everyone has the same goal. But what I'm hearing from this panel is that producers need to operate in an environment that reduces the risk for them. And no matter what happens, what we do here together, or these organizations that are working on it, really have that in mind for the producer, that at the end of the day, life has to be better and easier for them as they run their very important operations, no matter what scale they're at. So Stan, there's been a couple of questions on the app that were answered. Thank you very much, magical app people. And I don't know if there's any questions online as of yet from the Zoom people.
Not yet. So for folks online, please feel free to add your questions to the Zoom chat or on Whova.
Great, and so maybe we'll go to the audience here.
Thank you. This was a really interesting conversation, and I feel like it does circle back to yesterday's conversation, especially for me, about purpose. I think, like, what is everyone's coming into it with a different purpose. Darcy, you were mentioning how a lot of the groups that you work with don't necessarily go into it for the purpose of being like a super profitable single commodity business. They're trying to also live differently or have a different way of life, or kind of change the agricultural system as well. So it also, I think, reflects in terms of the purpose of technologies, and also the level at which those the data that is being captured through those systems. What is the purpose of those things, and does it support the purposes of small producers? Who is it supporting, and in what ways is it kind of either reinforcing the existing status quo of what agriculture is, and it in all of its both positive and negative aspects, and in what ways is it making it challenging? So it's more of just a reflection, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, purpose is a great way to think about ending out the day. And I think that almost all of the farmers we work with would like to be super profitable. I think that would be really great for them. We want to see farmers succeed, and being able to make sound business decisions is a really important part of that. And I also think that you're right in that many in a new generation in agriculture today have a different perception of what sound business decisions might look like, where they're looking at the long term, 50 years, 100 years, this piece of land, this food system, what it looks like, what are the other ways other than profit that they're generating value for themselves and their community. And I think that's where the ecological outcomes gets really interesting. I also think that there is not quite a straight line, but looking at the ecosystems, the complexities there in diversified small scale farms that are taking land out of production for riparian zones that might not seem like they're getting less yields as a result, but it's benefiting their business in other ways. Data can really help figure out how to make those choices and also demonstrate that those choices are beneficial. And I think that that's maybe where purpose and data and business can intersect. I don't know if that made sense in the end.
Did anybody else want to comment on that, or we can move to another question from the floor?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is I appreciate Jeremy's clarification because he's absolutely correct. Yeah, it is on the total profitability of the farm, and I think that Darcy made a very good point too, that there are different ways of making those decisions. Dollars makes you have to feed your family, but people are making decisions for different reasons. So I think that those are both really good add-ons and clarifications.
And Audra, if I could just add a comment as well. One of the, when we were stepping back and defining the mission and vision for the cooperative, one of the things we talked about, first and foremost, we need to create a prosperous future for our growers, our employees, and the communities in which we operate. And back to the point, and this just reinforces what Don and Jeremy have said. I've talked to growers who it's not about making exorbitant amounts of money. I mean, we all want as much as we can, but it's not. It's beyond that. But in these specific cases, they're talking about, how do I make my mortgage payment? I have to bring my kids back from university because I can't afford to have them in school. And when I hear those stories, it's heartbreaking, because it shouldn't be that way when you think about the work that farmers and growers and this industry provides. So I think it's a great comment about purpose, and that's what I like so much about the cooperative model. Is it's bigger than creating value for shareholders. It's about creating value for the people that grow products. And I think there's absolutely an intersection. We are a business. We're not a socialist organization, if you will, but we're in a business to create a future for not just the growers today, but their families in the future. So I think it's an excellent point.
Great. I believe we have a question from Bill.
Yeah, thanks. Great panel. I'm curious if you could characterize any discussions that you may have had as cooperatives, as trade associations, whatever, with your members. Have you had intentional conversations with your members, or do you mostly hear anecdotal discussions coming up? Because I'll just put this in the context that in some of the survey work we did at the University of Saskatchewan, didn't get a great sense that there are a lot of conversations going on about data across Canadian agriculture. So maybe that was incorrect observation on our part. I'd just be curious to hear what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, I can start with that, and I can say that I think you're right. We haven't had those conversations yet. We are. UFA, we're still formulating what is that position, and how should we advocate, and what is the right thing. And I think part of that is engaging engaging the producers. We've had some one-off ones, but I think that there's a lot of education that we need to provide back to ourselves and back to our producers, and engage them that way. And we just haven't done it yet to the degree that I think that we need to, because there are so many different areas that data is being collected right now, and people are unaware of that and unaware of the implications of it. So it's an immediate need, and I think it's something that we really need to get onto.
Darcy, Jeremy?
Yeah, so I would say anecdotally, primarily is how I've engaged with producers in our network on this topic, and I think it's for the new farmers, the young farmers. They've got so much to think about already that the last thing on their minds in some ways is like, oh, my data, ag data, like. That's not the thing that comes up when you are waking up at 3 a.m. as a farmer in your first 2 years of startup. But I also think that, I mentioned that a lot of our farmers are doing direct marketing. So they're selling direct to consumer and they're using a lot of technology platforms in that way. So I thought it was really interesting to see the consumer versus industry put up in one of the earlier sessions and the way that we think about ag data and technology. And I think there are a lot of farmers doing direct marketing who are in the consumer space because they're using social media, email tools to market to their customers. And so they are really intersecting with data in both sides of both columns there. And so perhaps also the relationship to data and the fears around it are still very much around, the social media companies, the algorithm throttling your sales channels all of a sudden, or how is the metaverse going to use your data that is really important to your business. So I think that's like another layer of it for folks who are really reliant on those technology tools too.
Yeah, just to add on to what you said, I've been farming for 10 years and ag data is still not one of the top 100 things that keeps me awake at night. I will say, I think you're right. I don't think there is a lot of discussion going on right now. And I think the reasons are twofold. Darcy, you mentioned a little bit, you said, we're so busy with everything that we've got going on right now. There simply aren't enough hours in a day. I farm canola and lentils and wheat. I don't farm extra hours in my day, right? So, the benefit of that is what it does is it creates an opportunity. There is an opportunity for someone to step into that market and say, look, I've created this business that will, even something simple as I've taken the terms of use, the terms of service for every major ag data company. I've ran through it and I've written it all in language that is easy, straightforward, and simple to understand. So when you sign up to company XYZ, this is what's going to happen. These are the rights you're giving up. This is what they're planning on doing with your data. These are the gray areas that are still somewhat unconfirmed, and those questions haven't been answered yet. So this is something you need to be aware of. Someone mentioned this to me quite a while ago, and I found it very poignant. As a farmer, you end up being faced with three choices. I'm very good at this, and I really like doing it. So this is where most of my time and energy is going to be. And that might be driving a piece of equipment. It might be standing around with a pair of coveralls covered in grease, fixing the piece of equipment. It might be sitting in the office doing the bookwork. The second option is I'm okay at it and I would kind of like to get a little bit better at it. So I'm going to take the time to improve at it. And option C is I don't have any idea what I'm doing and I hate doing this. So my money is far better spent investing in having someone else look after it. The other reason I think that this hasn't happened and this conversation hasn't really been faced, it hasn't really been brought to the forefront, I think speaks a lot to the financial literacy, or not the financial literacy, so the technological literacy or lack thereof when it comes to, dealing with this. People talk about how, and we've talked about it today, how people are seemingly unaware of the amount of data that they produce. How many people have wiretapped their house with Alexa or Google? The amount of data those devices collect is unbelievable. What is your personal value to Google with Google Home in your house, listening to quite literally everything you say, every command you offer it? I don't know what it is, but I suspect it's not zero. I suspect that that data is being used. And again, I know I did mention earlier the difference between discussing suspicions and fact. My understanding is that it has been proven that the personalization and the advertisements you're served on something simple like YouTube are based on your individual searches. So I feel reasonably confident in saying that that's not a a big gray cloud suspicion. I think that's reasonable to say that is actually happening. And so the question is, what is the value that you have to a major company? When we talk about ag data, it's important to look at where we've gone and what's been done to say, I think I can make a reasonable guess as to what the future may hold, right?
Thank you. Warren, did you have anything to add?
I do. One of the responsibilities I think that we have as a cooperative is to provide solutions to our growers, because I agree with everyone who's commented on the fact that Jeremy said it's not one of the top 100 things that data is not one of the top 100 things he thinks about when he gets up. But if we bring a solution that helps Jeremy solve problems with some of those 100 things, I suspect, and we can show Jeremy the value in it, I suspect he's going to adopt that technology. For instance, we're currently we've done some trials with drones mapping farms. There's been a lot of changes in our business. The food safety guidelines and regulations that we're required to abide by require a lot of documentation and a lot of work. We're putting solutions in place to make it easier for our growers to comply. I think if we're doing those things and we can clearly show the advantage that it has versus, and I'll just give you one small example. I remember at Grower Supply, that retail division I was talking about, we literally had, up until about a year ago, we were using invoices that had 3 parts, carbon paper, which I didn't even know existed anymore. And they were called pinks and yellows. And we got rid of those. We put a service online where growers can go in, get their invoices, get their statements, etc. Nobody's asked for pinks and yellows anymore because it's much more efficient. So, and again, as a cooperative and as our organization, I think we have that responsibility to bring solutions, to help people understand them, and to leverage them.
Great. Some of the things I wrote down from earlier is the economic gain going to go to the producers? And I think we're all very concerned about that. Another thing I heard about too was agency and the ability of the producer to control that to their benefit and to the benefit of their neighbors or their organization or their cooperative. Stan, is there any more questions from the audience here?
Yeah, just an observation that I wanted to put out there in the context of cooperatives and other models. We were talking about costs, and it got me to thinking the single most valuable computer software in the world is Linux. That's open source software that it's not really, especially the current, right? Or basic tools. How did that come to be? Well, over time, it became popular, it was used, and it became efficient for major companies to invest some of their own energy and time through their own employees to build it. And now that's what underpins most of the internet. So why am I telling you this? Well, I guess what I'm wondering is there a complementarity to that in our conversation around cooperatives and so on? Because, one observation is that we're spending a lot of time reinventing tools. There's 100 companies doing 100 things, but are there common things? Are there things where it's about coordination and resource allocation? I know there's a few organizations kicking this around, but surely there are parts of this that don't need to be reinvented 100 times, where some amount of open source, some basic tools that organizations say, we all need this stuff, or it sort of evolves that it's things that we all recognize could offer some advantages. So it's something to put into the conversation, I think, around cooperatives and other models. We haven't talked about open source, but we're talking about software, we're talking about data. There are some lessons to be learned from, well, not just Linux, but other things that are out there in the rest of the internet economy that are part of our daily life, even though we don't really know they're out there. And it's a vibrant ecosystem that might offer some cost opportunities and investment opportunities that I know it's a bit out of left field here, but I think it's at least something we should weave into this conversation and think about it as we're trying to inch forward and think about how do we, the sector, make this work and build something valuable. So not really a question, but something to throw out there. And if people want to react, have at it.
Any reactions?
I think it's a really good point, and I do appreciate the point being brought up of open source software, specifically with Linux. I think again, what that again goes back to is the technological literacy. We walk around in this day and age with more technology in our cell phones than what put people on the moon, and yet we have less of an idea how it works, what to do if it breaks. And realistically speaking, in most cases, when it breaks, you go meh and go get another one, right? Again, there are some changes slowly and procedurally being made with regards to right to repair and the ability to fix your own device or take it to someone that you would like to pay to fix it, rather than being locked into an ecosystem where only the manufacturer can fix it. But I do think it's a very good point, and I think it does fall back into both the lack of technological literacy, but again, it comes down to time. I as a farmer, yeah, great things. I've seen probably 15 different videos of guys who have home built their own GPS systems to run their tractor. One guy used a Mastercraft drill, if you can believe it, to turn his steering wheel. Incredible. I think he built the entire system for less than $1,500. Now, if you know anything about the cost of auto steer and GPS equipment, he's probably 1/10 of the cost of a new auto steer system. So there is lots of exciting things happening out there. But again, what it does unfortunately come down to is time. And, we all have 24 hours in a day. Where are most people directing their time?
I think you're one of the other, having used open source systems at work and so on for years, you get what you pay for. And I don't think anyone would suggest you want to do that, like stem to stern, open source, and farmers rolling up their own systems. I think that you're right. The leverage isn't there.
It isn't, but I mean, again, I talked about the things that you do that you really like doing. I don't mind pulling wrenches, so I very seldom have a mechanic on the farm. I know how my machinery works and I know where to fix it. That being said, you do get what you pay for. And when it comes to open source software, there's no tech support helpline. Not that they're always the most helpful, but there's no tech support helpline with open source software. If you program something and it doesn't work, you have to go back and figure out why it doesn't work. With most things in farming, my window of planting, my window of spraying, my window of harvesting, it's razor thin. It has to work when I need it to work. Everything is field ready while it sits in the yard, right? But once it's actually in the field, it needs to work 100% of the time. So.
Thank you for that. Any other comments on that one? Good. Any other questions? Those will be the last two questions.
Thank you for this panel and this discussion. Very interesting. I personally work for a tech co-op, and what I hear a lot from this super nice day is we see a lot of innovation around agriculture, with tech companies offering more and more services. And their problem as tech companies is how to get the end user, the farmer, push data on my service for my service to become more efficient and for me to gain value out of this data. And as a co-op movement, we think, oh, it would be great if these companies were co-ops, because we feel that the value is taken away from us. So we need to do something, and let's make co-ops out of them, which I think is needed, and it's great to see this debate happening now. But what I feel is that there is a bit of confusion about what can we do as co-ops. And maybe one question that is underlying and is not brought up, has not been brought up yet, or I've not pointed it out maybe, is what do co-op needs out of this digital transition? What is an agri co-op in the digital world? I think as co-ops, we can improve a lot of things for our members to be more efficient. But there is our own digital transition to think and to be in leadership of. Maybe I can, as a co-op, I would gain efficiency in knowing more about my members. So getting data out of my members is also a way for my co-op to modernize. And then I can think about services to provide to my members. And my members would be incentivized to share data with me. So it's just a reflection, like, do we have this project? Do we enable the cooperatives to think about how to build a digital project serving themselves as co-ops and serving their members? I don't know if there are any if there is any reflection from the panel here about what could be needed, as which kind of services we could improve as co-ops if we had the right digital tools to, I don't know, improve ourselves and improve our services to our members.
Maybe I'll take a shot at that one. I think that a cooperative is, by its very nature, is the collection, of its members, and I think that the value that a cooperative could bring here is in taking some of that work. We've heard a number of times that that's not what the farmer wants to do, is spend all of their day managing and inputting data, and that's just not going to happen, right? So a cooperative can help with that. A cooperative can help with making sure that the data is secure. A cooperative can help with making sure the data is standardized, is normalized, that sort of thing. So I think that that's the value that a cooperative could potentially bring, as well as making, I'll say a little bit, making sure around that the value goes back to that farmer. I don't believe that the best place for innovation is in a cooperative. I think that there are plenty of other places for innovation to take hold. So I think that there might be an end point to that. Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in here. So, I've played a role in developing many co-ops, and I've been in the sector. And one of the things, important things here is trust. And that's something that members generally have. And, whether or not the co-op is the right place to do that or not, I don't know. But there definitely is a good relationship built, a pre-existing relationship built. So it makes sense to me that there's some alignment there. So last question.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned, Don, about your experience in San Francisco at the Agritech conference, and producers maybe not being in the room to the degree that they should have been, and present an analogy from another industry where there's a cooperative, it's called Savvy, that they basically allow patients to get paid for giving information about their conditions. These are usually people with rare diseases, chronic conditions, and companies, healthcare companies, can access this data, and this cooperative aggregates this patient data and provides it, has real value to these innovators that are trying to build products. And that being an attempt to kind of take a group of people that know their problems, like farmers might not have great technological literacy by and large, but they know farming, they know producers, they know what they struggle with. Is there a role for associations, for co-ops, to mediate between where the innovation is happening, what products are being built, and creating that pipeline to enable design between where the problems are and where the capacity for innovation is, that you think could be good?
The answer is yes. I think that's actually a very important role for agricultural cooperatives to play, is to bridge that back to the producer. So I think that's a very valid point, and I do think that that's one of the things that we're here to do, is when you look at the ongoing relevance and value of cooperatives from an agricultural perspective, I do think it's incumbent upon us to help bridge that between innovative tech and on-farm trials, really. Yeah.
I would completely agree with that. And I can think of countless examples in our cooperative, whether it's on the technology side or on the hard infrastructure side, where that's applicable. So totally agree.
Yeah, and I might have a bit of bias. I've expressed it earlier, but I helped develop co-ops, so yes. With that, we'll close the session. And I want to again thank our speakers. Thank you so much.